Geometry Wars Retro Evolved. This is a really important game. It's important to me, and I think it's important to the wider gaming thing. But before we get into why it's important and why it's this amazing thing, let's just play it, because it's just, above all, it's super fun. So let's jump into it. So we've got Evolve mode and we've got Retro mode. So Evolve mode. This is what launched on the Xbox 360 in 2005. So what's that? 12 years ago? November 2005. So yeah, 12 years old. This counts as a retro game. I've always got this struggle of what does retro mean these days? Like, where's the cutoff? 12 years old. That's quite a long time. That's like in old consoles. That's like a whole generation, or like 2 or 3 generations. Anyway, we're ignoring that. What is Geometry Wars? It's a twin stick shooter. So we've got 2 analog sticks. We've got one for moving around, and we've got one for shooting. So you can shoot in any direction around you. And then we've got the right trigger. If you pull that, you'll drop a bomb. And you can see in the top of the screen, I've got 3 bombs and 3 lives. The bombs clear the entire screen. So this is it's like Robotron, or I guess like Smash TV. There's maybe a better example, but Robotron's the one that I instantly think of. So these red circles here, when you shoot them, they stop pulling in all the enemies like a black hole, and then eventually they'll explode and kill everything. So you've got to kill them. So you kind of initiate them, and then you've got to finish them off before they blow up. So Geometry Wars Retro Evolved. It launched with the Xbox 360 in 2005. It was like the shining star of the Xbox Live Arcade program, which was Microsoft's new digital distribution platform, which we hadn't really had before. It cost about £4, maybe $5. It was 400 Microsoft points, this was the time when we were buying this weird currency to buy our digital games with. But they later got rid of that, and it was probably like $4.50 or something. It was $5, and it was a download. So at that time, the Xbox Live Arcade games, they were dictated that they had to be under a certain size, because people had slow internet connections. So I think it was like 100 megabytes or 50 megabytes maybe. At first it was really restrictive. So the idea being that they were going to be these little arcade experiences, like little bite-sized games, and they were going to be cheap. And that was what the program was for. So why was it important? Like, for such a simple game, this goes deep for me. So the 360 launched, and it didn't have an amazing launch lineup. I think in retrospect, I actually feel better about it now than I did at the time. But the box games it launched with were Perfect Dark Zero and Cameo, which were Rare's 2 big games, and neither of them were great. You know, they didn't blow our socks off. But they were the big games for me as a big Nintendo fan. We had Call of Duty 2, which seems like a big deal now, launching with a Call of Duty game, but at the time Call of Duty wasn't a franchise that everyone knew. It was a hardcore PC game that they'd finally launched on consoles. It wasn't the household name. You know, it wasn't until Call of Duty 4 that the franchise blew up. This was just a PC shooter which Microsoft were bigging up having on their console. You had Peter Jackson's King Kong, which was absolutely terrible, but it was really easy to get 1,000 achievement points in it, so that's why everybody bought it. You had Project Gotham Racing, which was a great racing game, but very, quite dry. You're comparing all this to the launch of the original Xbox, which launched with Halo, which was the biggest thing in the world, and it's still a hugely important game. That's a launch title. Perfect Dark Zero and Peter Jackson's King Kong, less so. But then they also launched with the Xbox Live Arcade, which was a platform. It was a digital distribution platform for selling these little games. And Geometry Wars Retro Evolved was the big one that they would show off at all the events. And the main reason for that is the 360 launched with HD graphics for the first time. So it mandated that every game had to display on your telly at 720p HD resolution. And you can tell by looking at the visuals on this, Geometry Wars looks amazing in HD. Like, it's got all the little lines, the little sparks. This looked, from somebody who moved on from a CRT telly to an HD telly during the 360 era, I can tell you the jump was absolutely massive with Geometry Wars. It looks amazing on HD. So that's why they showed it off. But it's also incredible, and this game was really important for me because what it did is I bought this game at launch, Cost me £4. It downloaded over the internet, sat on my hard drive. It didn't come in a plastic game case that I could stick on my shelf. It just existed on my hard drive. But I kind of discovered that it was the best game at launch, and that's not a disparity to the rest of the lineup. Well, it kind of is. The rest of the lineup was terrible, but it speaks highly to how good Geometry Wars is, and it made me realise, and it made a lot of people realise that it didn't matter that this didn't come in a plastic game case that would sit on my shelf. It didn't matter that I didn't have artwork and an instruction manual that I could look at. It didn't matter that it cost £4. Like, it was an incredible game, and what this new digital distribution method would allow is it would allow game developers to make these like retro style experiences that were incredible, but you could have never sold them for 40 or 50 quid at Woolworths. That would be a bad value proposition. But we now live in an age where you can charge a lot less for it, and you can distribute it in a different way, and all of a sudden that broadens the landscape and allows you to create these games which are brilliant. They're just a different scope and a different scale, and that's obviously just expanded into the world we are now, where we use this term indie games as a broad brush, but it doesn't matter about being indie or not being indie. Like, Geometry Wars made me realise that games are games. It doesn't matter how much they cost. It doesn't matter whether you've got a plastic box to stick them in or not. Like, it's a video game, and we generally look at indie games now, and we call them indie because maybe they've got a team of 20 people making them rather than the 300 people that make Assassin's Creed. But the games we remember from our childhoods, like the biggest games in the world, the big Nintendo games, the big Sega games, they had 20 people making them, or even less. Like, games are games. It doesn't matter about the scope, and it doesn't matter about the sale price, and that's what digital distribution brought to video games, and that's why it's so important. And I think Geometry Wars was just the test case for me that made me realise that. I put infinitely more hours into Geometry Wars Retro Evolved than I did Peter Jackson's King Kong, and I bought King Kong for 50 quid, and I've still got the case, the game case, and it sits on my shelf. Is that a real video game? And is Geometry Wars a little bite-sized time killer? Because that's what I thought it was going to be, and I slowly realised that it wasn't. This was the best launch game on the console, and I still play it now, 12 years later. And it's still brilliant. It spawned 2 sequels, one of which was amazing, one of which was it was all right. But I look at the rest of that lineup, and no way was any of it that important. Well, Call of Duty 2 maybe was massively important, but that doesn't fit my case study. But still, I think you can see the point I'm making. It ushered in this new age of developers being able to make these new experiences, and it was exciting. And it's led on to hugely successful games now from little studios, which they just couldn't have made before. In a world where they had to make a game, print up 500,000 units, and get them into big gaming stores and supermarkets and stuff. You couldn't sell these experiences, and now you can, and I think that's awesome. So saying all that, the reason why Geometry Wars was so successful and why it did usher in this new age is just because it's a great game. Like, the gameplay holds up. It's still just really fun to play. This has never got old, and it still looks incredible. I think, as I say, they've knocked a couple of sequels out. I think Geometry Wars 2 was really good. It introduced new modes. So Retro Evolved has only really got this one mode, but 2 it introduced kind of new rules. So for example, you'd have a pacifist mode where you couldn't shoot. But there were little gates on the stage, and when you flew through them, they would explode, and that would clear the enemies. What else? I'm trying to think what the other modes were. But there were various. There were like 5 or 6 different modes, and there were just slightly different rule sets for playing the game. And they were all quite interesting. And obviously it had a classic mode, so that was fine. And then Geometry Wars 3 introduced stages. So it wasn't infinite like this. It was like a stage would have an objective, and you'd finish that and you go on to the next stage, and you go on to the next stage. And I didn't like that so much. I think there's a purity with this original, just endless arcade style score chase. And I didn't like 3 so much. But I think it was fairly well received anyway. I think 3 came out this generation. It was a PS4 and Xbox One game, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, the series is still going. They released one on the DS, I remember playing that was alright. Yeah, it's I mean, I'm saying all this as if you've never heard of Geometry Wars. I feel like anybody who's ever owned an Xbox has probably owned Geometry Wars at a certain point. It's a huge game, and it certainly was in 2005. You couldn't get away from it. But I don't want people to forget it, because I think it's really important. I like these red enemies here that have got the little like sensor on the front, and they just fly straight at you. One of the fun things about the game is that all these little enemies, you know, they're really simple. They're just little geometric shapes, which is why the game's called Geometry Wars, I guess. But they've all got different AI routines, so you'll learn that eventually. Like with Pac-Man, like those different coloured ghosts have got different AI routines, and the more you play Pac-Man, the more you learn that. In Geometry Wars, you know, you learn when the when the green enemies appear, if you shoot at them, they'll fly away. When the red enemies appear, they'll chase straight at you, so you need to dodge those. The pink ones will split off into other enemies, and it's this cool learning thing. How you learn all the, you know, what are essentially little squares and little diamonds. You learn their AIs, and I think that's cool. But anyway, that is Geometry Wars Retro Evolved. This here that I've just loaded into is the retro mode, which was when Geometry Wars first appeared on our screens. It was a bonus game that you could unlock in Project Gotham Racing on the Xbox, and it was just this very simple visuals, like shooting game, which they, I was going to say evolved, but I'm trying to avoid using that word because it's in the name. I'm going to use it, which they evolved into the game that launched with the 360 with all snazzy high definition graphics and stuff. But this was the original version. But yeah, Geometry Wars. That's. I think it's amazing. I think it's still totally playable. If you've got access to an Xbox One now, it's backwards compatible, so you can buy it. Still costs like £4. 100% recommended. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope it's been entertaining. I hope it's been educational, and I will catch you in a future video. Thanks so much. Bye bye bye.